You're listening to the IWN podcast. I'm Harley Handy. All views in the podcast are my own. This is like a part two to the previous podcast and all the crooked mayors in the north of Ontario are not held accountable at all. The police and the mayors work together. They're corrupt and crooked, and they have been for many years, and nobody holds them accountable. If you're poor in the north, you have to rely on like the food banks. They have them up there, but you have to rely on a city hall worker to bring the food baskets into town. Now, there's been many times where I was in Long Lac, Ontario, and I needed help for food, and I requested help for food, and it never came because the people that are at City Hall are biased and against the poor people and didn't want to bring the food baskets into town. This is the situation that's in Northern Ontario that the mainstream media refuses to cover. The politicians and all the wealthy like to hoard up all the wealth, and the poor people get nothing, and even the reserves, the band office, a lot of them are run by wealthy families, so the rest of the poor on the reserve get left in the dust with nothing. It's shameful. I couldn't even have firewood because I asked the guy down the road to help for firewood for some firewood to keep warm, and he gave me some free firewood, and the people next door ended up calling the city on us and telling on us and saying that we weren't allowed to have firewood. And so the city came and took pictures of our property without our consent, and gave us trouble for having firewood to keep warm. This is the situations in the north that needs to stop. The too much control of City Hall, and you can't even do anything on your own property without the people complaining, and it's sickening anymore to see what's going on in Canada. They're worried about people having a little bit of firewood, but they're not worried about big swaths of land being taken out, the trees being taken out and polluted. They're not worried about all the clear cut and all the mining and logging, but they're worried about somebody having a little bit of firewood. Sickening. They're also paying no attention to the fact that these companies, like Kimberly-Clark and all those companies, Resolute, Forest Products and all that, they're all pumping effluent into our rivers and streams and lakes, and nothing's being said in our air. The OSB board, chipboard, is being made in these small communities, and all the glue, the toxic fumes from the glue is going in the air and making people sick. Nobody talks about those issues. They're not talking about the effluent from the mills. They're not talking about all the pollution from the oil sands and all these petroleum factories that they have across our north. They all say move to the country, but they don't want to talk about all the problems that go along with living in the country at all. They don't want to talk about that. I put on YouTube. I'm going to talk about a number of different things. One of the things is the profiteer people on YouTube and other platforms. There's people that are going downtown to film the homeless and get content for their YouTube accounts to make money from their content and the filming. And then they go to eat after and film themselves eating just after they went downtown and put all the homeless people down. They like to talk about negative energy, but they never want to talk about the negative energy in question period in Queen's Park and Parliament Hill and city halls across the country. And they're failing to recognize that behind all these rich, wealthy mansions and houses is drug addicts, people with incontinence issues, young and old. The same things that are going on in the streets are going on behind these walls of these rich houses. The Conservative and Republican parties have created right-wing vigilantes that are going around filming and causing problems all over the place. Some of the homeless that are downtown are veterans of the military. It says in 2016, an estimated 2,400 emergency shelter users, 1.8% identified as veterans. This down from 2,950. 2.2% in 2014 in Canada. So a good portion of the people that are homeless some of them are veterans, and they went and fought for our country apparently, and they were left on the streets homeless, if they were lucky to make it back to our country after going to war. And there's also videos posted to the internet One of them was reported by a news site that talks about nursing home employees teasing elderly patients by dancing in diapers, and the video was released on TikTok. This is shameful. And it's not just the nursing home employees, it's the teachers that are doing this too. They're like mocking people who wear diapers, and saying things like, don't go near that person, they poop their pants, or they have dirty diapers or whatever. And they always make fun of people that have incontinence issues or are unpotty trained. Here's another article, and it's out of the Daily Mail, and it talks about a hidden camera in nursing homes showing worker shoving feces-covered rags in elderly lady's face and blowing nose on her sheets in an Ontario nursing home. It says 4 employees at St. Joseph's at Fleming Long-Term Care Home have been suspended pending investigation after a patient's son, Camille Parent, left a hidden camera in his mother's room over a 3-week period. The disturbing footage captured the way in which nurses fought with Helen McDonald, 85, who suffers from dementia, shoved a feces-stained rag in her face and blew nose on her sheets. Some of these health workers are ignorant, and there's no oversight. And it's very awful conditions that our elderly are put in. It's sickening that there's no oversight of the workers or home care or even the hospitals of what's going on. And this is why people want to keep their elderly parents at home, and they homeschool their kids, because the trust issues that they have. When I was up north, they wouldn't let Nana stay at home because she couldn't look after herself. But, they had home care coming all the time, but they were giving her showers at the beginning, and then they stopped. And then they started to use a cooking pot and a washcloth to wipe her down, because they couldn't get her in the shower, and she fell in the shower a few times under the supervision of those workers. It was all, they were supposed to be getting her in the shower, and they let her fall. And that's when they stopped doing the showers and resorted to using a cooking pot and a washcloth to bathe her. And the police ended up showing up and saying that she could no longer live at home, and they put her in the hospital, where she later died. And then we hear stories like this story right here, where it says a 3.5-year-old child having difficulty getting potty trained was brought to a Florida Public Safety Department on successive days last October and placed in jail, a high-ranking officer told a caseworker during an interview on the second occasion, October 6, 2022. The child was also handcuffed. Florida officers investigated for jailing child for potty training troubles. Like, just sickening mentality of these officers that they would even think that's normal to do. These are conservatives that want to bring us back in time. These are conservative, ignorant people that would love to bring us back in time. And some of these people wonder why people have incontinence issues. Well, this is one of the reasons right here. This article is out of the UK Independent News, and it talks about how a baby was circumcised without mother's consent in Nottingham. His nappy was covered in blood. I opened the nappy and I ended up having to leave the room because I felt hysterical. It says that the mother has described the moment she opened her baby son's nappy to discover he had been circumcised without her consent. Now, how are the doctors allowed to do these procedures without the consent of the parents? And when you look up the side effects of circumcision, you find male circumcision greatly increases the risk of urinary tract infections and bladder rupture as a result of complication of circumcisions. Which means that the circumcisions actually cause incontinence issues later in life. Just like the talc powder, circumcisions are really a procedure that really doesn't need to be done, but it's just a way for the government to make money. I'd also like to talk a little bit about impaired driving. There's a lot of articles on the internet recently, and even more now than ever, of people driving impaired. I think more action needs to be taken on impaired drivers. The penalty for impaired driving should be higher, because these people are getting away with driving impaired way too often, and our kids are being put at risk when you see so many school bus drivers being charged with impaired driving offenses and including the city bus drivers. All these bus drivers, there's no really oversight of that either, and I think that there needs to be increased oversight. A lot of the problems that we have today with the institutional run facilities and even institutional workers is lack of oversight. Even with the soup kitchen, it's a great thing that we have a soup kitchen, but the funding for the soup kitchen, it's not free to eat there. So you have to pay usually $1 or so, but the funding, there's no oversight of where that funding is going to. So there needs to be more oversight of that too. You know, they spent quite a large amount of time protecting the tank downtown here in London, in Victoria Park. They spent a lot of money restoring a tank that really didn't need to be restored. They focus on issues that really don't matter. Like we have a homeless problem right now that is at an epic proportions, and they're worried about a tank. That really should have just been filled with cement and left alone, or put in a museum. They spend too much time on things that we don't need to be spending time on. And our politicians are really busy trying to divide the population, and they're using sexism and racism and division, and they're the ones being negative. So if you're looking for who's being negative, it's the politicians, not the homeless. It's the politicians and the wealthy, that they're not being held accountable, and these dictatorial people that are wealthy and they have too much control. The corporations have way too much control, and nothing's being done about it. It's sickening. Our population needs to get a hold of these people that are greedy and put a stop to it. These greedy people, it's enough of the greed. And they always like to say things like, you should stand for the national anthem, or, where are you on Remembrance Day? These are colonial narratives. They have colonial narratives, and they don't want to talk about how the colonial narratives are what, oppressed indigenous people really badly. These dictators, these dictatorial colonial dictators need to go. I just came back from up north and I got to see how badly oppressed the indigenous people were being oppressed, and it was awful. These dictatorial colonial people are oppressing people in the north of Ontario very badly. These racist communities, these sundown communities that are racist against anybody who's not like them. These French communities, I'm not against all French people, but there definitely is some racist French people that need to stop what they're doing. They're oppressing people. It's sickening. The people from Quebec and Montreal need to realize they're an immigrant just like I am. I come from Ireland, my background is Irish, but I was born in Canada. I'm an immigrant, I'm a guest here just like a lot of the other people that claim that they're not, but they are. If you're not Indigenous, that means you're an immigrant here just like me. We owned a home in the north and we paid for it in full in 2011, and we lived there for 10 years, but we had to leave our home that we paid for because the town was so racist. It was a town that was in between two reserves. The town was mostly French people, and there was a generational and culture clash within the town, and it was awful, and I don't understand how it could get that way, but that needs to change in Canada. We need to stop these communities from doing that to people, and it's sad that I had to leave, and then when I left, my house gets burned down. That's how bad it was, that you would burn people out of town because they stand up for the environment and they're standing up for what they believe in. That's ridiculous. You're going to burn somebody out because they're an environmentalist and they don't want to do the mining and logging. That's really what it came down to, is because I'm not a conformist and I'm not a person that wants to join them in the destruction of our north. That's sad that they would even think of that's normal to do to people. And I was in the north and I needed heat, and so I asked the guy down the road, can you give me some firewood? And the guy said, yeah. the guy at the Skidoo place, and he gave me a bunch of skids that I could use to burn so I could have heat, because we needed heat. We didn't have a furnace at the time because our furnace broke, and I asked the guy to fix it, and he never replied back because we weren't wealthy enough to help, I guess. I don't know, but so anyway, I had this firewood, and the neighbors complained to the city that I had firewood, and so the city hall came and took pictures of our property while my grandmother was sick in her room, and they did it without consent. They came and took pictures of our property and gave us trouble for that. And so we couldn't even have firewood, but they're not worried about the big swaths of land, the big clear cut patches that they're taking out all our trees, and the pollution and the effluent that's going into our lakes and streams and rivers, from Resolute and Kimberly-Clark and all those companies that are polluting our land, and all the mining and logging, but they're worried about somebody with a little bit of firewood. The people always say move to the country, but they never want to talk about all the issues that come with living in the country. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to talk about the racist problems. They don't want to talk about all the problems that go with living in the country or the far north at all. And all that OSB board, the new chipboard that they got to make those new houses, it's all being made in Northern Ontario, and the glue that holds all those OSB boards together is going in our air. We're breathing that in, and the Conservatives don't even want to talk about all the petroleum factories and all the mills and all the toxic places that are spewing it into our air. They don't want to talk about those issues. They don't want to talk about it. They want to pretend that climate change doesn't exist.